Can we also briefly touch on radiocarbon and soft tissues in dinosaurs, as well as other arguments you use in your book for recent life argument? Can you say more about that, please?
Yes, well, radiocarbon is radiocarbon dating is based on an isomer of carbon-14, which has a comparatively short lifetime of 5,730 years. Half of it decays away. Half of any radiocarbon in a sample decays away in 5,730 years, and then another half decays away in another 5,730 years. Now, with the most sensitive modern accelerator mass spectrometers, it's possible to detect carbon-14, radiocarbon, in samples that would be about 50 or 60,000 years old, possibly in special circumstances up to about 100,000 years old. But for anything older than that, anything older than about 100,000 years, there should be no detectable radiocarbon. And for anything older than a million years, there shouldn't be any radiocarbon there at all, whether it's detectable or not. So anything older than 100,000 years should have no radiocarbon in it. But the fact is that almost everything throughout the geological column shows the presence of radiocarbon. So from coal seams that are supposed to be 30 million years old up to 300 million years old, coal should be radiocarbon dead, i.e. no radiocarbon there, but they show easily detectable radiocarbon. And even more significant, dinosaur fossils, for example, supposedly 66 million years, 130 million years old, they also show the presence of radiocarbon, which should all have decayed away. If these things were really as old as they're claimed to be, why is there radiocarbon there? Now, evolutionary scientists have claimed that it's all contamination. Where could such contamination come from? It's not introduced in making the samples. It's not introduced in the background of the mass spectrometers that are used. If it were introduced while the samples are in the ground, then it all decays away in 60 million years. So it would have to keep on recurring every so often. There'd have to be more contamination appear, or it would all have to be recent. Similarly, if there were contamination in radiocarbon dating, then you'd expect that there'd be contamination in other radiometric dating methods. You know, the uranium-lead method and potassium-argon. They'd be contaminated as well, because, I mean, it would be a neutron flux or something like that caused the contamination. Another point is that radiocarbon at the same quantities as is found in, for example, dinosaur fossils, is found in samples, artifacts from the Stone Age. Now, when radiocarbon at exactly the same level is found in the Stone Age, nobody talks about contamination there. They assume that it's perfectly reasonable to determine the date of the sample from the radiocarbon data. So you see the inconsistency of it. When it's found in one situation, it's contamination. When the same quantity is found in the Stone Age sample, no, it's not contamination. We believe the date then. There's a lot more detail than that in my book, Compact Time, and you can find similar things in books by other creation scientists.
Yes, can you just, all right, let me, I found some articles, so can I read to you about how soft tissues of dinosaurs is explained? So
Yeah.
here it says, however, evidence from radiometric dating show that dinosaur fossils are indeed millions of years old. Under certain circumstances, cells and soft tissues in bone are protected from complete disintegration. Formation of a mineral concretion around a bone protects biomolecules inside it from hydrolysis by groundwater. Infusion and coating with iron and iron compounds at a critical point in the decay process protects cells within a bone from autolysis. Cross-linking and association with bone mineral surfaces furnish added protection to collagen fibers in a bone. These protective factors can result in soft tissue preservation that lasts millions of years. How do you comment this?
Yeah, well, that's just a scenario, isn't it? It stems from some work that Professor Mary Schweitzer did. She was the first one to claim that iron particles would protect fossils, well, soft tissues, from hydrolysis and decay. And she carried out some experiments with soft tissues that she mixed with hemoglobin that she'd obtained from a slaughterhouse. She only carried out the experiments for about 2 years, and she found very little. Well, she found no degradation of the soft tissues under those circumstances. But of course, the concentrations of hemoglobin were far higher than they are found in the ground, and she only carried out the experiments for 2 years, so they were completely not typical of what happens with a fossil. I would say that finding preservatives for foods and for medicines is a very, very active research area amongst chemists and food scientists and pharmaceutical scientists and so on. And if what you just read were the case, if you could really protect soft tissues, foods and pharmaceuticals for millions of years, then food scientists in particular, and certainly pharmaceutical scientists, would be using iron particles or that condensation, those Maillard products that were mentioned in your report as well. They'd be doing that to protect them, but they're not. They know perfectly well that none of those things are really viable at all, or could protect materials for millions of years. And there are lots of studies. Furthermore, many of the fossils that have been studied, for example, the Triceratops horn that was studied by Mark Armitage, wasn't protected in any of those ways that are mentioned there. It was sticking out of the ground. You know, it's supposed to be about 80 million years old. It was sticking out of the ground, the horn, and there was water only about a foot below it in the strata. So it was exposed to oxygen and to water. Now, oxygen is extremely, we talked about it already. Oxygen is something that degrades organic matter. It degrades biological material and proteins and DNA extremely rapidly on a geological time scale. So that is really just a wishful thinking on the part of scientists. If you look in the chemical literature, you'll find that iron particles bring about what's called a Fenton reaction. They produce free radicals, and rather than coupling things together as Professor Schweitzer claimed, they couple with oxygen, produce peroxides, which lead to a lot more degradation. So in the long term, iron particles degrade material rather than protecting them. She only did her experiments for 2 years. In the long term, she would have found lots of degradation. So as a scientist, as a chemist, I don't find any of that explanation compelling at all, or even plausible in the least.
Yes, so you differentiate between possible explanation and probable, or what really happened, because they find one idea that could explain maybe this phenomenon, and they say, okay, that's no problem because there is one possibility for that. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Egyptian mummies, they've been preserved very carefully by the embalmers. And yet the DNA, for example, in Egyptian mummies is down to such low levels, such minute levels, that it requires that very special DNA amplification method to detect any at all. And the idea that DNA could persist for millions of years out in the open in fossils is just unbelievable to I would say to any normal scientist. I mean, paleontologists with no background in chemistry or food science or so on, they can believe that kind of thing. But one of the big things, if you work in a laboratory, one of the serious things is having to protect your proteins from denaturing, from degrading, and all the time people are having to put them in the dark, in the complete dry, in the absence of oxygen, with preservatives, with the best preservatives that can be obtained. And even under those conditions, shelf lives are only a matter of years at the most. The idea that they could go into millions of years just isn't viable.
Yes, I agree. I watched some Egyptologists explaining they studied the origins of Egyptian people. So they studied some mummies, and out
Yes.
of hundreds, only I think two or few of them
Yeah.
is useful to study, but it's really damaged. So no chance to reconstruct anything. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. They did get Tutankhamun's DNA and Tutankhamun's family. So that was one success. But as you say, yeah, it's pretty rare to find any.